Last month, disgraced former KCK detective Roger Golubski was found dead in his Edwardsville home. His death came on the very day he was supposed to stand trial for allegedly assaulting two teens over the course of several years. Well, this week, we learned Golubski's death was ruled a suicide. So tonight, we are hearing from those who say that they were denied justice.
Now, authorities say the gun Golubski used was stolen. The 71-year-old was accused of many heinous crimes over the more than 30 years he worked with the KCK Police Department. KCTV5's Grace Smith spoke to one woman who was set to testify in that December trial. Grace, how's she feeling?
Well, Zach, she tells me that this doesn't change anything. She believes that there is still more to uncover and that for her, this isn't over.
Do you wish he was still alive?
Yeah.
It's been over 25 years since Ophelia Williams says former KCKPD detective Roger Golubski sexually assaulted her after arresting her sons.
When he did that, it just took something out of me.
25 years of fighting for justice, something she continues to do today.
It's not just for me, because he hurt a lot of people, and he did a lot of stuff.
Golubski's trial didn't end with a verdict, but with a gunshot. He was found dead the morning of his trial, which was supposed to get underway in December. Instead of a courtroom, Golubski was found dead inside of his home.
It's not in healing, not yet, because he dead. I'm supposed to jump for joy. That's not doing nothing.
The KBI has closed their investigation into his death, ruling it a suicide. He left behind several letters, and the gun he used to shoot himself was reported stolen back in 2022. But this is far from justice for Williams.
If he left suicide letters, then that means he's guilty. Until I hear that he's guilty, then I'll be justified.
As she sits here today, there are still so many unanswered questions, like how did he get a hold of that stolen gun?
He didn't want to speak up on the truth or what really happened.
Williams also believes that Golubski didn't act alone, and she wants a deeper investigation into KCKPD. I reached out to the department today, and a spokesperson said no comment. Live in front of KCKPD headquarters, Grace Smith, KCTV5 News.
You can understand why Ms. Williams and so many of his alleged victims wanted to see his day in court. Grace, thank you. Golubski was the subject of several KCTV5 investigative reports over the years. You can see them all online at kctv5.com. Just go to the Investigates tab on the top of your homepage, then click Roger Golubski.
All right, now.
The Cows. Gus T. Renegade in for another broadcast, hopefully to share constructive information on the global system of white supremacy racism, that is constructive information for non-white people, victims of white supremacy. Today's date, Sunday, February 2, 2025, so I have been told. Today's subject matter, one I will say painfully, but this is subject matter that we have really dedicated ourselves to discussing seriously and placing in context for the duration of our 16 years broadcasting. You can go back. We had the OKC Artists for Justice on the program repeatedly, and in fact, I pointed out they were guests. Former enforcement officer in Oklahoma City, Daniel Holtzclaw, racist suspect. Who was he targeting? Explicitly black females. Raping and sexually terrorizing black females all that time. Think he got convicted and hit with 263 years worth of time. Been in prison. It's been about 10 years since he was convicted. We talked with OKC Artists for Justice, non-white people who went out to call attention to this case. They didn't say a word about this case up until really it got to the trial. It took about a year and a half from the time Holtzclaw was arrested in the summer of 2014 until the conviction trial at the end of 2015, but almost nothing was said about that case. Now, I know OKC is not exactly New York, but still. We also, Dr. Kenneth O'Reilly, repeat guest on the program, but importantly, he was a guest with us in the summer of 2023. He wrote the book on my shelf right there, Racial Matters, the FBI's secret file on Black America from 1960 to 1972, one of what white people say is one of the most important civil rights cases of that period. 1964 Mississippi, James Chaney and those two white boys being killed down there in Mississippi. Dr. Kenneth O'Reilly told us, and he wrote it in the book, how did the FBI break that case open? They went in and pressured the local white sheriff. We know you've been raping the black females around here, and we will snitch out you to the public. You're going to tell us what they did with James Chaney and those two white boys. And we started the whole program in August 2023. In fact, I almost made that a sound clip. Dr. O'Reilly said, yep, that's part of how they broke the case open, and that was standard operating procedure for these white sheriffs, deputies, enforcement officials. That's the job. Get to go out and rape black people most of the time, or frequently black children. Civil rights history. Then Thursday, current. We are reading Dr. Maya Angelou's autobiography. Now, she wrote 7. We're reading number 4. We already read I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. Dr. Maya Angelou, victim of rape, victim of racism, and she spoke eloquently to Charlie Rose, who was also accused of sexual abuse. She spoke eloquently to Charlie Rose. This is the whole history of white supremacy racism. They terrorize and abuse black people, make slaves out of us and all the rest of it, and then go around and rape all of these black people, some of whom have cared for, been, tremendous, helpful, all the rest of it, and go and terrorize and rape all the children. So that is the whole history of racist white conduct in this part of the world. Dr. Angelou waxed beautifully, honestly about that. And what did I say today's date? February 2. In some circles, they call it Groundhog Day. There is some repetition. Seems like that is an integral aspect of racist culture. Get that badge, get that authority so you can go out and terrorize and rape black people with impunity, which is exactly what Roger Golubski did in Kansas City. Took the cowardly way out, really, in my view, admission of total guilt, allegedly committing suicide at the end of last year on the day his trial was scheduled to begin. That's why I said that's total guilt. Like, really, I want all the details, but oh man, you can't even go and have day 1 of the trial and defend yourself? What a cowardly race soldier. Anywho, they dismissed the charges, and we won't get all the details of exactly how did this race soldier terrorize an entire town of black people for all this time, and how did that happen? One of the organizations that is addressing all of this and looking to care for the victims as well, all of these vulnerable black people, many of them terrorized when they were children, trying to do the best that they can to compensate, look out for the mental needs, and making sure that we do not forget this story. I even had to confess, we started talking about all this in 2022, and I said then, that is really disgraceful, because we had been on the air for years at that time. I had never heard of the name of Roger Golubski until 2022. If you had presented me any of the victims' names, Roger Golubski's name. Huh? What? Huh? Now, I'm not in Kansas, so I don't get to see Kansas news every day, but They had been talking about this and how he terrorized all these black people in Kansas for all this time. They had been talking about that for years. It had been in the newspaper, in the news for years. I didn't know about it until 2022. Trying to compensate as best we can. Joining us for the program live today, the organization Justice for Wyandotte. You can go to their website, justiceforwyandotte.org. Wyandotte is spelled WYANDOTTE. So it's justiceforwyandotte.org. You can see some of the tremendous work that they've done. They have articles, all the work that they've been doing in the area over the years around this case and trying to help black residents of the Kansas City, Kansas area. So grateful to have them on the program with us today. Joining us live, co-founders of the organization, Ms. Khadijah Hardaway, Ms. Nikki Richardson. Ms. Hardaway, Ms. Richardson, you're both with us?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Thank you both so much for sharing a bit of for you all Sunday evening with us to learn more about this case and kind of get some of the updates from where things stand presently. I guess we'll kind of get a brief intro from both of you, whatever you would like to start with yourselves and the organization, and then we'll try to get as much details about what's happening as possible. I guess we can start with Ms. Richardson. Any brief biographical details you would like to share about yourself and the work that you do for Justice for Wyandotte?
Yeah, so I am born and raised in Kansas City, Kansas. I am one of those 2020 pandemic George Floyd activated community members that some would probably call a bit of a cliche. But that moment really transformed me to want to just get involved what was happening locally in my community. And just like you, I wasn't fully aware of Golubski. I think if you had said his name, it wouldn't have registered. The story I was connected to was Lamont McIntyre. And that was a story that came out in our community in 2017, and I was familiar with that. And it wasn't until 2020 when I really understood Roger Golubski and who he was and really got an understanding of that case and how it involved the harm of so many black women on top of the long line of possible wrongful incarceration cases between him and a corrupt district attorney that we had at that time. And that activation led me to meeting Khadijah Hardaway, and us getting together and co-founding Justice for Wyandotte alongside some other great people. And we have just continued to been trying to advocate for the victims and the survivors of the people, the egregious actions of Roger Golubski and the people around him. And our biggest charge has been just to make sure that this story isn't exploited, that the people that have already been harmed aren't further exploited. And I've just been blessed to have a partner in Khadijah to fight that fight. With that being said, I guess I could pass it on to her.
Okay, well, I am Khadijah Hardaway. I am not a native of Wyandotte County. I grew up in Kansas City, Missouri, which is the twin city to Kansas City, Kansas, which is a county within Wyandotte County. Right? Am I right, Nikki?
Kansas is a city within Wyandotte County, yes.
Yeah, okay. And I grew up most of my life as an activist. I worked for album sites, and so when I got the call about advocating for women, it was a short fit. That was in 2017, just before Lamont McIntyre was released. At that time, the Lamont was, I think, filing for a state lawsuit, and I believe he won that lawsuit at the time. But there were many more victims, many more people involved. Once I started advocating in 2017, I got a number of calls from people in Wyandotte County and in Kansas City, Missouri, that were closely connected to some of the women that we advocate for who have been either murdered or raped allegedly by Roger Golubski. After reading the lawsuit of Lamont McIntyre, it really, really concerned me, the number of women who have been violated, but not only that, the number of officers who were involved. Roger Golubski is just a poster child. On the lawsuit, it lists 9 other officers by name, and somewhere between 20 to 24 other officers as Jane Doe, John Doe, and their superiors within that lawsuit. Some of them had even testified and put out affidavits against Roger Golubski. So that was very alarming for me. And so that's when I really began to work in Wyandotte County. For the first time ever, Wyandotte County started seeing rallies and protests against the police department and the leadership there. And yeah, that's just kind of how we ended up where we are now.
Wow. Much obliged. Just for folks who've not seen both of you, you are both Miss Richardson and Ms. Hardaway classified as black females?
Yes.
Yes,
yes, I was born and raised in Kansas City, Missouri, and Nikki was born and raised in Kansas City, Kansas.
Gotcha. Okay. And for listeners, again, visit the website justiceforwyandotte.org. You can see more information and support their work. One tidbit that I thought was important when we were hearing details about the affidavits that some of the officers had filed against Roger Golubski, now deceased, suspected race soldier, that there were Jane Does who were listed as perhaps being accomplices in all this. I think that's important. Did I hear that correctly, that there may have been some white, or we don't know the racial classification, but some female officers who may have been involved in all?
Not necessarily involved, but listing them as people who may have witnessed something or brought something forward to the police department, and they either were a part of it or they were harassed by the police department for trying to be whistleblowers, so to speak. And so it spoke to a number of issues within the police department, not just the police department, but the government itself. So, yeah.
Much obliged. Thank you for the clarification. And I think both of them kind of touching on how they were activated around 2020, the George Floyd privileged black male killed in Minnesota. And I've heard that from a number of folks that kind of spurred them to get more active in dealing with the problem of racism, white supremacy, wherever they happen to be at. Let's see.
So for a clarification, for clarification, we started in 2017. I met Nikki right along George Floyd, but we actually started advocating for the victims in 2017.
Much obliged, 2017. Thank you kindly. And that's when the Lamont McIntyre case, which we talked about previously, wrongfully incarcerated and terrorized his mother, Rose McIntyre, talked about. That was kind of the first case that when I started getting to some of the details about all this that I heard about. But there, as you all stated, so many more, my goodness. With Justice for Wyandotte County, you all have a mission statement for your organization. I'll read it for folks. We persistently foster sustainable communities in the Kansas City, Kansas metro area by advocating for honest, accountable, and transparent governance and empowering people. If you had to break that down for a black child in Kansas City, what does that mission statement mean?
Yeah, I can take lead on that. So as laypersons to put, for the community, we are your advocate when you feel as if though there has been an injustice amongst the governing bodies in Kansas City, Kansas. So if you feel like you have not been treated fairly, if you feel like you're falling through the gaps of the system, allow Justice for Wyandotte to help you navigate that. And we provide support in a variety of different ways to help you with that. So I guess that would probably be how I would explain it. Khadijah, is there anything else I'm missing?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we've really focused on is empowering the people that we advocate to become advocates themselves, to educate themselves on the process. I mean, for us, the most egregious part of what we were doing is the fact that people were not educated about the system and how that allowed them to be used and to be exploited throughout our community for various reasons, whether it was just to tell a story about Roger Golubski, whether it was something directly connected to the prosecutor, or what have you. Their stories were being shared without them getting the proper help and being able to sustain themselves. So that's why we formed Justice for Wyandotte. And in many ways, that empowering yourself empowers the entire community, helps change the trajectory of like what corruption looks like and what accountability looks like when people start standing up for themselves, not just individually, but collectively.
Yeah, which is what we've seen happen in KCK. One story gets out there and it's starting to be believed, then other people feel more comfortable. And even now, we still have people, coming forward, saying that they're starting to feel more comfortable with telling their story now because they have so many other people to lean on.
And just to give you an idea of how people have suffered, when I came to the picture, and this was in 2017, that there had been over 1,000 people interviewed for the Lamont McIntyre case, and that's in a 10-year span. So you're talking probably about 100 people a year. There was actual investigations that happened that somehow mysteriously were covered up in Wyandotte County. Then you have to think about this going back at least 5 to 6 decades, not just a simple maybe 20 years ago. This is entrenched within the Wyandotte County Police Department.
5 to 6 decades. That's what she's like. Wow, how many folks even listening haven't even been alive 5 to 6 decades? Wow. And just because you all, we haven't really been talking that long, but it seems like you all have touched on this twice already. Again, speaking with Khadijah Hardaway, Nikki Richardson, Justice for Wyandotte County, exploitation of these vulnerable black victims in terms of people coming in to take tidbits from their story or how they were victimized, exploited, and then using that material however they want to, and these victims are still not getting their help. That's striking to me because most of the people that I come in contact with, they have not heard of Roger Golubski and what happened to these victims at all. So that's stunning to me to hear that, people are coming to kind of exploit and take advantage of them for whatever purposes. Can you speak to that a bit more?
So in many ways, we have a large pool of organizations who advocate on behalf of people who have been allegedly abused and or murdered by the police department. In that, there are typically donation dollars that come in that don't trickle down to the people who really need it. And honestly, that exploitation and that lack of trickle down it doesn't really serve the community. It definitely gets the organizers paid within organizations, but it doesn't fare for the people who are telling their story, who have, if they told you your story, you probably couldn't stomach it. So it's hard for them to stomach every single day, function, go to work, and then it's not just them. Once a person becomes a victim of the police department or the authorities, the leadership, it trickles down to their kids, their nieces, their nephews. Some of the stories include stalking by the police department, which continue to this day. And that stalking is not just the person who has been victimized by the police department, but people closest to them, so that they don't talk, so that they don't stray away too far. So when Roger Golubski committed suicide, a number of the victims could not sleep, like for days at a time. And so we went into a real triage to make sure that these victims were seeing some of the therapists that we set them up with, that they had what they need. But we ran into so many roadblocks because we've done our job of making sure that our victims and the people we advocate for are represented, and that they can withstand going through the legal process in the judicial system in order to get justice. And that required a number of things. So.
And I just want to add that a lot of the trauma that Khadijah is speaking to is a lot of the reasons as to why Golubski was not only able to get away with it for so long, but also why a lot of people, even within KCK, weren't aware of what was happening. Now, if you go into the Northeast area, it was very much an open secret, but nobody would say anything to like the media or, get too much attention to it, just out of pure fear of what Roger Golubski would do, because he had a history of stalking you, of harassing you, of threatening you, whether it's you or your children. And then when the story did come out, a lot of the reasons why it took so long for it to get national attention, or for it to reach your ears on this, media segment, is that sometimes Kansas City, Kansas gets overlooked. And that is just something that we have always battled with as a city. We, as a culture within the Kansas City, Kansas community, don't really want to be a big city. So we're, in some cases, we're absolutely okay with being overlooked, but it becomes to our detriment when things like this happen, because when Kansas City, Kansas comes up on the news, nobody stops to take a second to really read about what's going on. And so it took a lot of work for Justice for Wyandotte to really find creative ways to continue to get the story in the media into different ears, so that people could feel comfortable with having that conversation, so it could be more of a discussion and it wasn't just something that kept getting swept up under the rug.
Context of white supremacy. Again, Khadijah Hardaway, Nikki Richardson joining us live, the Kansas City, Kansas area. That is so important because we just discussed that yesterday in terms of the power dynamics. Now, yesterday we were just talking about a black male in Texas who reported enforcement officials for driving recklessly. They were doing donuts in the snow in the police vehicle, and he reported this. They called him a snitch and started posting his information online. And what kind of no-count guy are you to go out and snitch on the police officer? This, like, he feared for his safety. I said yesterday, I laughed, but that is totally not funny because that's dangerous. Now imagine this. We're alleging, hey, this officer may have killed somebody. Alleging, hey, this officer may have raped somebody or somebody's. And talking about they're stalking you, being stalked. It's totally different being stalked by a citizen and being stalked by someone with a badge and a gun. Totally different.
Yeah.
Even speaking of that, you all have been doing this since 2017. Have you all been stalked, threatened, pressured in any way to not do this work?
Yes, we have. I'll let Nikki go first.
The reason why Khadijah chuckles is because, I do have a pretty interesting story that occurred shortly after I started speaking at protest rallies in the fall of 2020. So I had been, going to rallies all summer long. And around the fall time, I lost my driver's license, which isn't uncommon for me.
I don't think you lost them, but we'll leave it. Allegedly, you lost it.
It mysteriously disappeared. Let's put it that way. And how it reappeared was very, very interesting. So I was at home sleeping, and my mother called at 4 o'clock in the morning, upset and scared, and was asking me where I was, and I was confused because where else would I be at 4 o'clock in the morning other than in my bed? So I told her, I was like, Mom, I'm asleep. I'm in my bed. She said, well, where's your car? And I look out my window. I'm like, it's right out front. What's going on? She said, well, there's police at your grandmother's house saying that you just ran from them and tried to flee and elude them at 100 miles per hour down Parallel Parkway. I was like, yeah, Ma, that couldn't be possible. I've literally been asleep this entire time. And she said, well, they're trying to get into the house to arrest you. And so, let me get your grandmother on the phone. So my grandmother, she didn't let anybody in. I told her that I was okay and that I was safe. And she let me know that the police officers informed her through the door that they were going to just leave a ticket for me in her mailbox. So the next morning, I had a friend go to the mailbox and retrieve the ticket. And they left a very interesting note along with this ticket, which was for fleeing and eluding the police. And it stated something along the lines of, I don't know why you decided to run. It doesn't look like you have a record, but I would make better decisions so innocent people don't get hurt, with a little smiley face, and underscored the word innocent. And, I was naturally shaken. I went with my mother to the police department to speak with the supervisor about the ticket. And since it was a paper ticket, which he said was very unusual, usually they would use a digital ticket because it immediately goes into the system. He was able to just go ahead and just remove it. But he also informed me that that is not the way you deliver a ticket, and it's actually a federal offense for them to put it in the mailbox. And so I had made a Facebook post about this because I really didn't know what else to do, and it ended up in the Kansas City Star. And that was the moment when I realized the arena that I was dealing with. And they did return my driver's license. So I did get it back after it disappeared. So
mysteriously.
Yeah.
So the way I have received threats is a little different. I pride myself, and now I shouldn't say pride myself, maybe I'm humbled about it, but educating the victims on the fact that they need legal representation, that not everybody needs to hear their story. And so when I became a heavy advocate, in particular for Nico Quinn, I was harassed by elected officials, community members, lawyers, just in many ways telling me that, you can lose your life. And I do believe that the reason for that was because at the end of a lot of these cases was a payout for so many people, and that these women were helping them to receive those payouts, but the women were not getting any justice. Matter of fact, they were told that, and this is in the case of men being exonerated, they were told that, we get the men through and then we'll help you. And my thing was like, there's so many lawyers in Wyandotte County. Why can't someone represent you right now? And so we took it upon ourselves to educate the victims and tell them that, if you're going for a deposition and there's a lawyer sitting next to you, if you haven't signed a contract, that's not your lawyer. And just making it plain. And so I was also threatened with the idea that maybe I was a lawyer or impersonating a lawyer or impersonating an investigator, because me and Nikki do our due diligence to make sure that everything we put out is factual and is based on the law and the Constitution. So we do that very well. But we're not investigators. We're not lawyers. We're ordinary citizens that decided to take on an extraordinary situation.
Wow. That is staggering. Wow. I don't know anybody, especially, I don't know any black people who have led police on a 100-mile-per-hour high-speed chase, lived to tell about it, and didn't even get arrested. Like, wow. I mean, just wow. If you were able to do all that and then get a good night's sleep afterwards, wow, you are something special. I mean, and then the license came back. Amazing.
Mm-hmm.
I have lost all kinds of goodies before, but mysteriously it reappears. That is so.
So
Go ahead.
So in most cases, I think they are able to scare people. I mean, there have been many a times that me and Nikki have been warned about what the consequences are in dealing with the police in certain situations. Mm-hmm. And I honestly think had she not posted it on Facebook and had the story not gone through the media, that kind of harassment probably would have continued. We know many of people who started out as advocates who no longer advocate in the same manner that they began. That's because the police have gotten to them in some form or fashion to send a threat.
Wow. Yeah. If I heard that correctly, Miss Richardson, you said that they went to your grandmother's house. You know, I guess maybe they thought you were hiding out under her porch or something. At 4 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, no, it was. That was actually just by circumstance. So I just happened to have moved during this time period. And so the address that I had on the driver's license that they received was my grandmother's address. So they just didn't happen to have the address of where I actually laid my head. But from that moment forward, I said that I was never going to put the address that I laid my head on my driver's license, and I haven't since. I've kept it, my grandmother's address with her permission, of course, simply just because we as a family felt like that was the safest option.
Oh, yeah, my daughter was mysteriously ran off the road one time.
What?
Mysteriously, yeah.
This was since like 2017, since you started doing this work?
This probably would have been about 2022 or so.
Jeez.
Yeah, this is around the time where we began to ask for a federal investigation. But for me, I was also working in Kansas City, Missouri, doing the same thing. If you go look up a guy named Malcolm Johnson, he had been shot or executed inside of a gas station in the urban areas of Kansas City, Missouri, with 5 cops on him. And so we advocated for justice for that young man. And, yeah, so I couldn't really tell you how the harassment was coming because it was coming from both sides. But, yeah, it was a serious thing, stressful as well.
Dang. It does not sound fun. Just when you say it was coming from both sides, what do you mean?
Well, because I live in Missouri, I was fighting corruption on both sides of the wire, looking for transparency in multiple cases. The police chief that we have in Kansas City, Kansas now was a deputy chief in Kansas City, Missouri, at the time of Malcolm Johnson's killing, which I think it was March of 2021, if we're getting ready to come upon his anniversary. But yeah, he was the police chief then. And in the process of him transitioning, which he had to run for that position, we advocated for a cold case unit. And I believe that everything that was going on, it was just kind of hard to measure me and Nikki as far as where we were on any particular chessboard. And that's just because it was just the two of us kind of moving in a way, I'm just going to put it honestly and bluntly, in a way that God wanted us to move, and making sure that we dotted our I's and crossed our T's at every goal, every protest, every rally. We just didn't want to be helter-skelter. We didn't want anybody exploiting our names or misunderstanding what our message was. So we worked very hard at making sure that we presented ourselves in a way that we would be safe, one, and two, that we just didn't put ourselves out too much. So in a lot of ways, we created ways for the community to get involved beyond just me and her meeting and strategizing.
Wow, that is dangerous work. The cows, again, Khadijah Hardaway, Nikki Richardson, co-founders of Justice for Wyandotte. Just to make sure I get on the record, Miss Richardson's grandmother not answering the door when those officers arrived. Bravo. Like, I almost wanted to hit the applause button. I mean, wow. I talk about that all the time. If they do not have a warrant, you are not obligated to open the door. And they will let you know if they have a warrant. But if they don't have it, deuces, put it in the mailbox. We will talk. Brilliant. The portion about the therapists I also thought was so poignant, where you talked about there's so many victims. I mean, if this went on for 60 years, they're like generations of victims here. Were you able, because I know sometimes talking to non-white people, it's such a difficulty because you'll want to talk to a therapist who is non-white. Hopefully you can find a therapist that's black to discuss the dynamics of racism and all this. Like, what was that process like, finding therapists to speak to some of these victims?
You can take that. Nikki, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry, I had my phone muted. I didn't want you to hear any background noise. I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Yes, ma'am. Just, you all talked about that powerful work of getting therapists for these generations of victims.
And kind of how to navigate that challenge.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Our biggest thing with trying to get people to understand their trauma has been through education. And Khadijah's been an amazing trauma training coordinator for Justice for Wyandotte to kind of help bridge that education. And the reason why we have had to go that route is because the big barrier with Black women who have been traumatized, because the Black community doesn't always see mental health as a part of health, can be resistant to therapy. And so there's a resistance to understanding that you're experiencing trauma, and some of the things that you are doing and you're behaving is out of that trauma. And then to say, okay, let's try to get help for that. We have been, blessed to partner with people who have therapists of color. So we have not really had to deal with the issue of not being able to pair them with somebody who doesn't look like them. But even though we were blessed to be able to have Black women who would dedicate their time to being with these women, getting them to therapy was tough, not only because they themselves had their own inner resistance, but sometimes there was just economic barriers that sometimes you don't see from non-white or white, communities. For Black people, you have to figure out childcare. You have to, figure out, who's going to cover my shift at my second job when and I guess it wouldn't be this for Black people, for anybody who's low income, right? there's extra barriers that you have to have, that you just don't have the luxury, even if you have free therapy, to be able to be free, to be able to have access to that therapy. So that's really caused me and Khadijah to constantly kind of relook at how we're offering our mental health options and resources to make sure that it's meeting their needs at where they're at. And so that's why we have the Solidarity Fund. So we can do things like take care of their child care or assist them with their transportation. We are working with some great mental health organizations in KCK right now to continue to provide free therapy for the people that are impacted. But Justice for Wyandotte knows that that's not the only barrier. It's just paying it. Sometimes they need help just getting there. And so we're continuing to fundraise so we can make sure that they have all the support that they need through their mental health journey as they're going through their legal journey. I think I caught all of that. But again, Khadijah is our trauma training coordinator, so she might have some added pieces to that.
So one of the things that Nikki and I found out is that we're very innovative and creative when it comes to mental health issues. Very triage, very hands-on in the immediate sense that someone needs therapy right after an incident happens. And what we've learned is sometimes these facilities and institutions are not equipped with the number of people needed or even the number of beds that's needed to help individuals. So we found creative ways to get people the help that they need. One of the issues that we've run into is the fact that we do have twin cities, Kansas City, Missouri, and Kansas City, Kansas. Even though the crime was committed in Kansas City, Kansas, a lot of people have moved over to Kansas City, Missouri. And in some cases, you have individuals who have been victimized in Kansas City, Missouri, who now live in Wyandotte County, who need our assistance too. So we have to figure out clever ways of helping people and understanding what our boundaries are in that. Again, because it's just me and Nikki working on a small budget, trying to serve many people.
Wow,
we still there?
That is amazing. That is amazing. Context of white supremacy within reminding folks, I guess, for our geography lesson. And I am no expert. I'm about 2,000 miles away from the KCK area, although I have been there before. Kansas City, Missouri and Kansas City, Kansas are very close. And we talked about that before. If you go look on the map for Missouri, Kansas, you'll see like, oh, okay, this is kind of same metropolitan area, they might say. You talked about this grassroots effort here, the two of you. If people go to justiceforwyandotte.org, where can they support your funding efforts if they go to the website?
Yeah, if you just go to www.justiceforwyandotte.org/give, it goes directly to our giving page, and you will see our Solidarity Fund. It'll also be on the homepage. You can just kind of scroll down a little bit further. There's some other ways that you can give. If you can't give with your money, you can definitely sign up to give with your time. But like I said, we have a long road ahead of us. So any help to the Solidarity Fund to continue to assist those that have been impacted would go a long way.
Justice for Wyandotte.org. Give, and they have a variety of ways. You can certainly contribute financially, time, and energy. Long way to go. And in fact, just before we get to some of the details, some of the news reports, some of the victims in this case, Roger Golubski, when it was reported that he had taken his own life at the beginning of December, the day that the criminal trial was scheduled to start, some of the victims expressed skepticism and saying, I look at the obits page every day. Let me see the body. I mean, what in the world? You've lied and all this deception and corruption for all of these years. Is there any evidence, any reason that we should be suspicious about whether or not Golubski is actually deceased at this point?
You want to take this one, Khadijah, or you want me to?
I'm going to let you take it, and then if I need to follow up with maybe something.
Okay. I probably could speak for the both of us here, but definitely correct me if I'm wrong, Khadijah. The skepticism around whether or not Roger Golubski is even dead is absolutely valid. And if you really understand the seedy corruption that has been allowed to go on inside of Kansas City, Kansas, and really throughout the unified government of Wyandotte County, you really can kind of understand how people would think that something else has happened here and he has found a way to escape having his day in court. Although I completely understand why the community feels this way, we're constantly in communication with people who are closely investigating this case, and we have not received any information to suggest that he is alive. Recently, the autopsy report and the KBI investigation has started to circle around his death. The only thing we haven't been able to see is a body. Unfortunately, he had his funeral already, and from our understanding, it was closed casket. So no one has been able to actually lay eyes on it to get that reassurance. So I understand wholeheartedly why people would have questions, because just the fact that he was able to commit suicide that morning breeds so many questions about nefarious activity. But yeah, if Khadijah, if there's anything else that I add, that you'd like to add, just go ahead.
Well, I mean, you know how you have a sense that you know what's happening because the way it transpired. To me, the way it transpired gave the idea that he ran. So I was at the courthouse that morning in Topeka, and a deputy let me know that Roger Golubski was not in the courtroom and that he was on the run, was his words. And then he came back out maybe about 10 minutes later and was like, he's not going to show up. It's just the way he said it and how assuring he was that this man was on the run that, I don't know, I just immediately got the feeling that, of course, there was going to be a trial, but like, where's the alarm in finding him? You know what I mean? I didn't feel that sense, but I knew that they were actively working on a warrant. The deputy let us know that. And before the warrant even went out, my understanding is that the call was made that he had committed suicide. And so I don't know, and I don't understand. So I was at the courthouse at 8:15. He committed suicide by 9 o'clock. And the time frame of him being on his way to court and me sitting there and watching that warrant being issued and him actually killing himself before the warrant was there, I don't know how to describe it, but it doesn't make any sense. There should have been deputies at his house waiting for that warrant to be cleared so that they could go in. So how did they miss the gunshot? How did the neighbor? It makes no sense. If you're looking at it from an investigative point of view, and you watch Law and Order or any law show, it just absolutely does not add up. So the time frame, the body when it was brought from the house did not look like the body of a 300 and some odd pound man. The stature of him, the height, it just didn't look like him. No one saw the body coming out, only the news at some point, because they waited around for that particular thing to come around. They said that the body looked like trash bags on the back porch. I mean, how can you miss a large man like that? Where was the caregiver? How did he end up on the back porch? There's a lot of unanswered questions. And then who was the suicide letters written out to? And how did this man all of a sudden decide that on that day, he's going to take his life and have the opportunity to write 5 suicide letters at the same time? I don't know. It doesn't spell out honesty or transparency. That's all I can say.
Do you see all those questions? See there? Wow, that's why important to talk to the people who are directly there. Even the commentary about what transpired at the courthouse, that he's on the run. And even for folks to pause for a moment and recall now, I said now, when we started talking about this case back in 2022, Golubski was arrested. Okay, we got pending criminal charges. The discussion that we had all those years ago was, wait a minute, house arrest? Wait a minute, he's got sexual abuse crimes and stuff. That's pretty serious. Why is he on house arrest to begin with? And then he violated the conditions of the house arrest, and they still let him kick it at home. And we said, what is going on? If that had been Lamont McIntyre, you would have put him back in prison. Nope, you violated the conditions. We gave you a chance. Back in. We're going to hold you until, this goes to trial or whatever. How? And he got a stolen gun. He's not even supposed to have. He should have been in custody, and he gets a stolen gun. Man.
Yeah. So even that's questionable, right? The stolen gun. Who's attached to it? Why can't? I don't wish to know who the lady is, but the idea that they don't know who she is, it makes no sense.
Way too many questions around all of this. They've dismissed the charges, unless I'm misinformed, against Golubski with his alleged suicide. And that's the way I've been saying it. Reported suicide, alleged suicide. They've dismissed the charges in terms of they have a separate case involving his use of this drug kingpin who is in greater confinement, as is generally the case, Cecil Brooks, black male. These charges are going to continue. Are they pursuing other officers who may have been involved, aiding and abetting in allowing Golubski to get away with this for all these decades?
What I do understand is that there's 2 different cases. There's the one with Cecil Brooks, and that's a RICO case. The one that he was on standing trial for when he committed suicide was sexual assault against the women.
Correct. That's my understanding as well. My understanding is the charges for the sexual assault, those charges have been dropped. The RICO case, that's still involving Cecil Brooks and Lamarck Robertson, Richard Robinson, and I think these are all black males who are in greater confinement, and him using these alleged drug sellers and what have you in the area as a part of his criminal scheme. That is ongoing, and these black. Even as I looked at this, I was like, wow. So for all of this, it looks like the only court proceedings that might take place are against 3 black dudes. Ouch. And they may have been involved in criminal activity, so I mean, they should be prosecuted if they were involved. But I mean, wow. No Golubski trial, no other officers, and that's that. Shame that this happened, and moving forward. Do you think that there's going to be an opportunity? I mean, they should, in my view, it should be multiple layers. It should be going back and looking at every single case that he had anything to do with. I mean, we're talking decades that we'd have to be going back and looking at all of these cases, and then all of the department and individuals who were involved. Like, this couldn't, I think you had said before, like, this was kind of an open secret that people knew about this. So there would have to be a lot of folks like, man, how was this allowed to happen for so long? Is there any sense that that's going to happen?
So there's a couple of things that is possible and in the works. As far as looking at Golubski's cases, currently our district attorney's office has mentioned and seems to agree that these cases need to be reviewed. He has the Community Integrity Unit, formerly known as the Conviction Integrity Unit, which was the unit he created out of his work to exonerate Lamont McIntyre. And so he is going to use that unit, basically, is what he's proposing, to look at all of those cases. How long that will take, do we have the capacity or the budget to do that long term? That is a whole other story. But that is something that has been talked about and looks like could be very possible. As far as making sure that there is a pathway forward to make sure that this doesn't happen again, that is a charge that Justice for Wyandotte has taken on. We are in communication with the Department of Justice to build that pathway forward, since there will not be a federal trial. We are also looking into some other pathways of justice, such as a reconciliation hearing. And I think I'll pass it on to Khadijah to kind of elaborate a little bit more on what that could possibly look like.
So the Truth and Reconciliation is something that came out of South Africa with Mandela and his wife, Winnie Mandela. And it has since been used in Chicago and a couple of other blue states. It's never been done in a red state as far as I know of. But this will allow everyone who's involved, victims, even people who are perpetrators within the police department, to come forward and to tell the story of what happened, and to have our elected officials do their due diligence in making sure justice is served, prosecuting where prosecution needs to be happening, healing where healing needs to be happening, and restitution and reparations is the word that I've added to the Truth and Reconciliation. I firmly believe that Wyandotte County will not be served unless there are tremendous dollars put to what happened to that county. And because there is no through receipts of like what has happened, I don't know if you know about the open record situation where people can't get their open records to even move forward with some kind of case, is one of the issues in Wyandotte County. But this will give the idea that something new can happen, at least acknowledge what has happened in Wyandotte County. The issues that we have run across is that we've, and I say this respectfully and humbly, Nikki and I have done our job so well that there are multiple lawsuits against the unified government and the police department, which has put us in a unique situation where elected officials and people of leadership do not want to speak out for fear of what could happen because of those lawsuits and the legal and political ramifications around it. What would be helpful for us is being on platforms like this to just express and have others express to our elected officials, because me and Nikki, again, we're small. We have a plate full, as you can see and have heard. But people around the country can support the ideal that Black women deserve to be at least recognized at the bare minimum for what has happened. But at a larger scale, they can heal. They can function in their day-to-day life with the proper resources and tools at their hand. That's something they haven't had. And me and Nikki are just barely scratching the surface of that. And so, it's really about the dynamics of how people can engage and help move that needle forward, because it's honestly something that we can't do by ourselves. We don't have a political machine. We're little, like to tell people, me and Nikki are like little Simbas or Nalos, and we need a Mufasa or a Scar behind us that can roar, because that's the only thing, the way we believe that Truth and Reconciliation Commission will be able to move forward.
Context of white supremacy. Ms. Khadijah Hardaway, Ms. Nikki Richardson, Justice for Wyandotte. Go to the website, justiceforwyandotte.org. I'd forgotten all of this is taking place in the land of President Obama's white mother. She is rolling over in her grave. What a disgrace. Let's see. I see we had folks who dialed in with a question. Octavius in New York, did you have a question for our really inspiring guests, Khadijah Hardaway, Nikki Richardson, joining us live from Wyandotte County, Kansas. Octavius in New York. And actually, let's see, Octavius in New York, when did you first hear about the Golubski case? And then you can get to your questions. When did you first hear about this case?
Greetings, guys. Greetings, our guest. Really appreciate you being on. I did hear about the case though through, I believe it was through the cows first. And then I started to hear a little traction on it in other spaces, but nothing much ever came of it. Nobody really spoke about it outside of the cows. It's probably the only place that spoke about it consistently. The other thing I wanted to ask, and thank you, the guests, for coming on as well, but what are some of the issues you guys find when organizing people when it comes to doing like social justice work? Like, what is one of the bigger hurdles that you run into when you're doing a lot of this work?
I'll go ahead and start. There's a lot of different hurdles when you're trying to collaborate with people, because everybody has their own objectives and their own priorities. Doesn't mean that their objectives and priorities are bad, but sometimes it's different. And so getting people to understand how to compromise on some of that can sometimes be hard if there has not been a habit of doing that. And Wyandotte County hasn't had a habit of really getting organized, at least within the Black community that was the most impacted. So we've really tried to at least always let people know that we are always willing to work with you. But sometimes that can be tough. There's competitions, like Khadijah had mentioned earlier in the segment. There's, donation dollars and funding. And so sometimes people don't want to collaborate because they feel the need to compete. But as far as just everyday people wanting to be involved, the biggest thing that I noticed, and it is just because it was just such a different story for me, in 2020, when I was activated, a lot of other people were activated as well. I didn't realize that it was trendy for some people to be a part of the movement. And as the time has gone on, it's no longer trendy to be a part of the movement. And then other life priorities. Well, for me and Khadijah, this speaks to our lifeblood. It speaks to our survival. We have no choice but to continue to do this fight every day. For other people, they have the luxury of being able to just go ahead and sit this down and continue on. And, you know, we hope these people return back to us, but we don't always want it to be when, you know, there's a whole bunch of movement around it and it's become a part of pop culture, because a lot of this work is done when it's not, you know, in the media like that. A lot of it is doing the work day in, day out, making the calls, sending the emails, talking to folks. And a lot of that isn't flashy or fun. It's just hard work. So that's what I've noticed.
For me, what I've noticed is that fear can paralyze people. And that some of the people that are fearful have frustrated me because they can make the biggest difference. And I'm just gonna put it out there. I probably shouldn't, but within the police department, there is a lot of people of color who have also been abused by the police department, who are fearful. And I've never been in the position that they're in, so I can't say that it's not warranted, but I do wish that some people could get past the fear and tell their story, because it definitely would make a difference. But we live in a place where revenge and you speak out is something that people believe can get you killed. And so that's been my biggest issue. The other thing is that there is misguidance by our leadership, purposely done to keep people under control, to keep exploiting them. Nikki and I have done a great job of not necessarily exposing those kind of people, but steering the people we advocate away from people who mean them no good, who don't plan on finding justice for them. But again, like we say, we use the word exploitation a lot because it was at the forefront of why Justice For Wyandotte was created to begin with. We noticed that after the victims would tell their stories, that they would spiral out of control, that they wouldn't be able to get up and go to work, which would lead to catastrophic issues like losing their house and being evicted, not having lights, water, gas, just the basic essential things that most people would have. And for the community to walk around and act like something like that is unrecognizable to them is absolutely heart-wrenching. So those are the things that frustrate me the most, is just the lack of, sunlight that really needs to be put on, not just Black women, but me and Nikki, we advocate for impoverished people, period. And we have a lot of white families that we advocate for, who have been abused by the police department, just like the Black women. We have advocated for homes, put people up in hotels, sought them out so that they can get off of drugs. Some people have been on suicide watch. So there is that, but it's the trauma and the fear that is directly connected that paralyzes them from just being able to show up at a rally, just being able to, carry their own torch. That is the most heart-wrenching for me. Although I feel very heavily also what Nikki has said. And I think we both, sometimes we switch the hat around. Nikki has worked closely with other families with officer-involved shootings and facing the fear in the families or the fact that they're not close enough to do anything that can help. We face a number of issues that we feel could change a little bit, make the job a little easier.
Thank you both for that. That was really informative. The first thing that I really liked was what was said, as Nikki, was in regards to the trendy aspect. I live out here in New York City, and what I saw, people protesting in the street during the George Floyd scenario, and that spoke volumes to exactly how I viewed the situation. It was trendy at the time to do it, the quote unquote so-called right thing. And fear, I think we can overall agree that some of us as white people, as non-white people, should be in some kind of fear. I definitely think so in regards to dealing with white people. One last question, and this is in regards to trauma. When it comes to the medical services and other things you offer, do you see the medical services that you offer as like the cornerstone, like dealing with the trauma, dealing with helping people if they're, out of shape, obese, and people may let go of themselves due to the trauma? Do you see that as a cornerstone of some of your work?
Do you want to take that, Nikki?
Yeah. So our more focus has been more so mental health. Although we do creative approaches to mental health that could improve your physical health, our biggest goal is addressing the trauma as far as from an emotional standpoint, mostly just because they have a long legal journey ahead of them, and it is going to be extremely stressful for them to be able to be empowered enough and be prepared enough to go through that journey. They needed to have that mental health care alongside of it. There was no way that we were going to be able to do one without the other. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you both for your time and your energy. Appreciate all your answers. Thank you.
Much obliged. Octavius in New York. Lauren, did you have a question? The co-founders of Justice for Wyandotte, Khadijah Hardaway, Nikki Richardson. Lauren, did you have a question?
I do, sir. First, I wanted to thank you ladies for coming on the broadcast, and just I wanted to let you know that I think what you're doing to help the non-white people that have been victimized by Roger Golubski and other law enforcement, that's very admirable. My question, Ms. Richardson said that when law enforcement went to her grandmother's house, they left a ticket in the mailbox with what I would describe as a threatening note. What was the ticket written for, and what happened with that? Was it dismissed, and have you had any more harassment from law enforcement?
Yeah. So since it was a paper ticket, and the ticket was for fleeing and eluding, and also speeding, since it was at 100 miles per hour. And since it was a paper ticket, when I went there the next day to the local police department with my mother, I spoke with the supervisor. And since they didn't make a digital form, it didn't go into their system. So he was able to just really kind of tear it up right there in front of us, and just dispose of it, which also was one of the reasons why I wanted to push forward with making it a public record and making sure that the media was aware of the story, because I didn't want it to just get pushed up under the rug. But he did inform me that that is not the appropriate way of delivering the ticket. So nothing actually came of it, and I followed back up with it. I haven't had anything that severe. I of course, have taken necessary precautions to make sure that I don't experience that situation again. But what Khadijah had mentioned before when I had told the story is 100% accurate. I believe the fact that I went public with the story and went to the media prevented future harassment from happening. I also continue to be very involved with my community and started building good relationships with certain elected officials. I became a campaign manager and helped get good people elected to office. And through that work, I was able to kind of insulate myself. So Now, if something were to happen to me, there are people who would care, and that would make a little bit too much noise. And so I think in a way that has protected me from any further or equally severe harassment, if that answers your question.
It does, ma'am. Thank you.
Much obliged, Lauren. Let's see, our victim in New Jersey. I forgot. I should have asked. Oh, she still might be there. Lauren, when did you first hear about the Roger Golubski case?
When you started talking about it on the cows, I hadn't heard it on the news before, but since then there have been several things about it on NPR, and there's like one or two different segments on NPR. I don't remember the names, but it talks a lot about Roger Golubski and his victims, things like that.
Right on. Victim in New Jersey, did you have a question for Ms. Khadijah Hardaway, Ms. Nikki Richardson? Before you get to your question, sir, when did you first hear about the Roger Golubski case, victim in New Jersey?
Through the Cavs. That was the first time.
Okay.
Through the Cavs.
Right.
Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, was that 2020?
I think we first started talking
about it. You
about
first
it.
Reported on it, or it was around that time, correct?
I think around 2022, thereabouts. But yeah, we were late too. But better late than never.
Okay. Good evening, guests. I have a question. So when you said that, certain cases such as this one, people stopped being interested when it became less trendy. Do you have like any people that stopped answering like phone calls that once showed interest in this case that you can no longer get in touch with, things of that nature?
Not in reference to the case specifically. That was more so in reference to community organizations and volunteers who were very eager to partner back in 2020, but have become less responsive as the years have gone by. The only thing that I've noticed that has broken down is our relationship with the chief of police currently. At first, there seemed to be some willingness to talk with us. We did a campaign to get a cold case unit in Kansas City, Kansas, because we didn't have one. And that was very much linked to the Roger Golubski story, the number of unsolved homicide cases of women who he had been known to be associated with. And so we were in communication with him. But since then, as this case has become more high profile, it's been very hard to get the chief of police to sit down and have a conversation with us or collaborate with us. But we are working on that, and we feel strongly that we'll be able to have conversations with him about how to reform policy this year.
I would speak to the trendiness and say that it's an up and down thing with trendiness. When it comes to the story being trendy, me and Nikki have been reached out to by several major outlets across the country, and we literally will not share the story unless we know that somehow the victims and the people we advocate for are going to somehow fare from that, because we know Hollywood and other productions pitch this at millions of dollars, right? So there has been many of opportunities to share the story, but not in a way that we feel is going to get justice or compensation for the people we advocate for. And that's at the forefront, because again, we speak to what dollars are needed to have therapies to treat mental illness, and not just only mental illness, but there's the thing is trauma, immediate trauma, not just from the idea that police are doing something to people, but catastrophically, there's things happening every day that compound on top of the victims, natural disasters, just a host of things. Right now, people don't know, but Kansas has a high tuberculosis outbreak, the largest the county has ever seen. And with an administration like this, again, this is something that's going to compound on the community. So we're trying to look at what we do from a holistic point of view, not just from a trendy point of view, and something that's going to fare us down the road. And so we look for people who are going to partner with us to ensure that this community can survive itself generations from now, not just what Roger Golubski did. He is not the only one. And so we try to look at it from that perspective and not just the trend or what's going to get in the media today versus how long things will last for the longevity of safety and good health, wholesomeness, I guess.
Okay. Prosecutors and judges has been reprimanded and let go for less. Was there any backlash from the judge who granted the non-custodial imprisonment of Golubski, and maybe like the prosecutor for not, I don't know if the prosecutor objected to Golubski not having a non-custodial kind of like, not sentence, but supervision or not being in custody during this trial. So was there any backlash from towards the prosecutor or the judge?
Nikki, you want to take that?
Yeah. So from my understanding, there are legal teams from the victims of Golubski that are looking to file a complaint to that judge. If that's happened yet, we don't know just yet, but I know that was in the realm of many of the solutions that was talked about on kind of like what to do going forward. So yeah, that is pretty much the sentiment with a lot of people that we have talked to and the people in the community, was why was he allowed to be on house arrest, especially after he had violated his house arrest, and why was there not proper monitoring and supervision? There was just a lack of seeing Golubski as being a danger to the community, but also being a danger to himself. But which is unusual because his lawyer stated that he was despondent, stated that he was not in a good mental state as a result of the federal trial. So why additional steps wouldn't be taken? I would think even Golubski's lawyer would be interested in understanding why the well-being of his client wasn't at the utmost forefront of this process. So that is an absolute valid question. Justice For Wyandotte would be in complete support of assisting in any form of way of pushing for a complaint against that judge.
Okay. Last question, Gus, if I can. What's the racial makeup of the police department during the time of Golubski's terrorizing the community, and now, like, what's the is it diverse? What's the makeup of this police department?
Not diverse at all. Has gotten better since the era of Golubski, which this would be the 90s and early 2000s. It has gotten more racially and genderly diverse since then, but it is still predominantly white male, even though Wyandotte County is probably the most diverse county in the Kansas City metro area. So, yeah, it is definitely not a reflection of the community that it serves at all.
Okay, thanks.
Much obliged, victim in New Jersey. I know that's why I like talking to people who are directly in the area, because you can learn so much more information. Just either go there directly or talk to as many of the folks there as you can. I had no idea about the tuberculosis outbreak in Kansas City. Reuters, this is just from January 29th, this is like 3 days ago. They have a report, an outbreak of tuberculosis in Kansas City, in the Kansas City area, has grown into one of the largest ever recorded in the United States, with dozens of active cases of the infectious disease reported, according to health officials. As of January 24, 67 active cases of tuberculosis or TB had been reported in Wyandotte and Johnson counties in Kansas. Yikes. I mean, health and wellness. I had no idea. That is, well, I bet you if I did some digging, because this is one of those respiratory, probably going to have a disproportionate impact on the very vulnerable black people that Roger Golubski was targeting. I suspect these would be some of the same people that would be very much at risk for TB if they're having this sort of, wow, that is staggering. Man, whew, man, I have learned so much. Even just with what I just said, when I view all of this, I view what happened, Roger Golubski and him terrorizing generations of black people in the Kansas City area for all of the, even seems like it spilled over into Missouri for all these years, as this is the local system of white supremacy racism. Do you all think that that's accurate, that all of this is a product, a manifestation of racism, white supremacy locally?
Yeah. Simply put, I know for a fact Khadijah could definitely elaborate on this as well, but I don't know what else to call it. The fact that it was allowed to occur was as a result of white supremacy, the reason why it was allowed to go on for so long, the reason why this pathway of justice looks like the way that it does, the way that the story was overlooked. All of it is rooted in white supremacy.
Earlier today, you talked about Shani Goodman and Sherna, the civil rights activists that were murdered in Mississippi. At the heart of why they were able to be captured was the police department. At the heart of the work that I did with the late Alvin Sykes was the idea that police departments participated in the execution of civil rights activists. As far as I know, the history of policing has never been for the safety of people. It was for the protection of retaliation of former slaves from retaliating against their slave masters. That's why policing came. It later turned into the protection of property and state, not the protection of people. What I do know about white supremacy and racism is that the heart of it is economics. I give this data all the time, and you can go look it up. Well, for every homicide, murder, execution by the police department or anybody, it costs an upward of about $1 million per case. Some of them can go into the tens and millions of dollars, right? And so that means that every aspect of anybody that had anything to do with that homicide, that murder, or execution is getting paid. The only person that doesn't get paid is the victim and his family, her family, usually. Usually we only take out a $25,000 life insurance policy that doesn't carry us any further. One person can get rich off of a homicide, murder, or execution by the police department. And so I always look at the economics associated with racism and who is lining their pocket with the ideal of people divided. And that would be what I look at the most when it comes to Wyandotte County. And it is visible that Black people economically do not fare well at all, and that someone else is capitalizing off of their pain and suffering.
Who is Alvin Sykes?
Alvin Sykes is the only African American man to ever write legislation who has not been an elected official. He is born and raised in Kansas City, Missouri. Both cities, Kansas City, Missouri and Kansas City, Kansas, like to claim Alvin Sykes. He was adopted. Well, he started in Kansas City, Kansas. He was adopted in Missouri. And he is known for educating himself through the public library. He was the first ever scholar of the public library system. But he authored the Emmett Till Unsolved Civil Rights Crimes Act, which allows the Justice Department to look into cold cases. The first one went from 1970 and before, and this second one goes to 1980 and before. We're looking to push the third one, which will retrospectively look into all of cold cases, especially those dealing with civil rights violations.
Wow, that is so impressive. Wow, amazing. Alvin Sykes. I have to research to learn a little bit more. But that is legendary. Yes, we do need that for all of the cases that have been infected by suspected racist Roger Golubski. Just as the co-founders of Justice for Wyandotte, do you all have like organizational definition of racism that you use to kind of help explain how all of this relates to the local system of racism in Wyandotte County? What happened with the Roger Golubski case? Do you have a definition of racism that you use?
Khadijah, I probably can't just give you that. I don't know if we've ever, as an organization, have talked about defining racism, because at our core, that is not necessarily what we are fighting. We are fighting the things that allow racism to hide. We believe that if there is true transparency and true accountability, it fights against racism. So I don't think we've ever taken the time to actually sit there and define it. We have literally just been focusing on trying to disable anything so it just doesn't exist in Wyandotte County, or at least it makes it very, very hard for it to exist in Wyandotte County. But Khadijah, you may have a definition that could.
People have always told me that racism is privilege plus power. For me, racism starts with capitalism. Again, I believe that white supremacy and racism is a spoken mirror to economics. When we were brought to this country as slaves to serve in economic labor. Economic labor still exists. With the administration and how he is speaking to white men and the authority and superiority of white men speaks to racism, and it also speaks to economics. And economics being in the forefront of what white men want and how they seek power. And I say white men because literally feminism is controlled by white men. I don't look at myself as a feminist, nor will I ever do that. Again, it's controlled by white men. It's the same thing, I believe, with almost every sector of genre within the civil rights laws, the color of law, is this idea that there's capitalism off of all of that, whether it's religion, you're Jewish, whether it is LGBTQ. It all takes a focus off of the black movement in the United States. And so I speak to being womanism and black nationalism when I speak about racism and power, because I believe at the heart of it, again, is the economic, the almighty dollar. And everyone in this country is a slave to that dollar.
context of white supremacy. Before we can't take their whole even before we let Khadijah Hardaway and Nikki Richardson depart, I had to ask, and it just came up with the feminism component, with all of this important work that you all are doing and being threatened by police and accused of leading enforcement officials on 100-mile-per-hour high-speed chases and living to tell about it. Have white feminists come out to support your work? That's something that I try to highlight on a regular basis, because sometimes that support is not always there. Have they, at least white feminists in the Kansas City region, have they come out to robustly support your work and consistently through all these years dating back to 2017?
I would say, so our network of volunteers and pools of volunteers come from a variety of people, religions, and there are some feminists in our volunteer pool. And there's absolutely no clash. So I think for me and Nikki, what is important is that we stay focused on who we are actually advocating for. And the majority of them are Black and brown people, but there is also a pool of white impoverished people that the police department take advantage of. We've spoken to a lot of them, not just a handful of them, but a lot of them. And so it's not something that, and then again, when we look at racism and divide, we don't often look at it and say that there are some white people that were indentured servants or happened to be slaves, and that couldn't be further from the truth. So, I mean, it encompasses just people who don't fare well, period, in Wyandotte County. But the majority are brown and Black people. And so, we've been entertained and supported by many of groups, LGBTQ. What we do is we try to stay focused on what our issues are, keep those at the forefront. A lot of times I call certain groups infiltrators. In the 1960s, when we had the civil rights movement, it was infiltrated by the women's movement, Amelia Bloomer. That's where we came from, the ideal of pants and blooming and good housekeeping. All of those overshadowed and saturated the civil rights movement, dwarfing it. And so me and Nikki are very careful about what we project and what our mission is, and keep it clear so that we are not infiltrated or watered down by somebody else's ideology or mission, or what I could say, investment into our movement.
And I'll just add that, our current support is extremely diverse, and it's because, like Khadijah had mentioned, our work is extremely diverse. We are looking to help people in general, and so we definitely have cases where the victim is white. But those aren't just the only cases where we see white support. We really do see diversity across across the board. But in the same breath, as far as consistency, on both sides, no matter whether it was white organizations or Black organizations, the consistency tapered off as the years went on. It wasn't just white organizations and white feminist organizations that fell off. Our local NAACP chapter here was not active and a part of the conversation. There are a ton of communities of color that were not active in the conversation consistently through the years. So I can't say that it was one over the other. Honestly, it was really the community as a whole has to take responsibility to continue the fight, and not only when it pops up in the news and you're reminded again that you need to set some time aside to make sure that you're supporting these people who need you.
Wow. Miss Richardson or either Miss Hardaway, were any of Golubski's victims, to you all's knowledge, were any of them white people?
Yes. We had a list that started with like 33 women. On that list, 4 of them were white, 1 was Vietnamese. There were a couple of Mexicans, and the rest were African American. But that list grew. It didn't just stay there; it grew, and that's just the women, right? But there is a young man. Well, he's passed away, but P. Coons, who was he was exonerated just 6 months ago. He died. I mean, there's a ton. It's hard to put it in perspective.
That's what I was.
Yeah. So I just want to add that it's definitely primarily Black women that he targeted, but it went across race lines. But it really does speak to, because Roger Golubski, he used a variety of different factors that he went into his decision-making on who he was going to target. And he definitely targeted people who were vulnerable. For whatever reason that they were vulnerable, that was who he targeted. But it really does speak to, when it is easier for it to happen to Black people, it then becomes easier to happen to everybody else. So although that he primarily started with Black people, that empowered him to then go and explore into other avenues.
And then you have to understand that Roger Golubski is only a poster child. He had help.
Right.
He had help from the prosecutor. He used different tactics. So, by the way, in some cases, people are still using those tactics today. And so this is not something that he did alone. There are many boogeymans just like Roger Golubski that were inside of the police department.
Amen. And boogie women, I guess we're going to use that. Tara Moorhead, white woman, and she's not even in the police department, prosecutor. And I'm certain that some of those same tactics, as she just stated, are being used. And that was the question I was going to ask. It's difficult to even put this in perspective. I'm putting it in air quotes for people. So what's the official count in terms of the number of Golubski's victims, quote unquote, officially, where it stands right now? Do you all know?
My understanding that there was, and I could be wrong, Nikki, but 122 people is what he was going to stand trial for in the racketeering. In the sexual assault case, I think there were 8 victims total. Wow. In that assault case, with the idea that probably more would have come forward as the trial moved forward.
Given everything that we've heard from the co-founders of Justice For Wyandotte and just common sense from these types of cases, I am certain that number is substantially higher. But she said 122 would be enough. I mean, wow. Wow. 122 victims?
Yeah.
That, in fact, I can wrap right there. Timothy Hazlitt Jr. Now, Exeter Springs is in Missouri. But, as we keep saying, all of this is really close. They've said it repeatedly that some of Golubski's victims, they migrated across the state boundary. They trickled over into Kansas City, Missouri. I think they even said some of these folks got victimized across state lines over in Missouri because they're so close, which we talked about before. Again, get the map. You can look at Kansas and Missouri. It's right on the state line. You can drive back and forth, no problem. Timothy Hazlitt Jr., white male, accused of being sexual, the same thing Roger Golubski was doing. Got a dungeon in his basement, tied up this Black female, and they're finding Black females in a barrel out in this area. The trial is supposed to be upcoming. We talked about that case. We connected that with Roger Golubski, and I remember when they talked about that case, there were accusations that, hey, we think somebody is targeting Black females in the area. The news picked it up, and they said, You all are making up stories and lying. There's no serial killer. Nobody's talking to black females. Get off of social media. And then a few weeks later, victim runs out of the basement of Timothy Hazlitt Jr. Now he's in jail waiting trial for sexually abusing, terrorizing these black females. And they're looking, same thing we just said, they are looking for more victims. Now, given everything that we've heard, you've got a corrupt police department, local system of white supremacy racism, and lots of vulnerable black people that can be targeted, and you can't even go to the police for help. Whew. Have you all been paying attention to the Timothy Hazlitt Jr. case? Do you think that is connected to what's been going on with all this corruption with Kansas City police?
Yeah, we as a community came together and informed the Justice Department of what was going on in Missouri. To the date, there are still children and missing women popping up every day in Kansas City, Missouri. Kansas City, Missouri, and Kansas City, Kansas are the biggest hubs for human and sex trafficking just because of the way our highways and main arteries are set up to escape quickly. And so it is something that we often talk about. It is a pillar in the work that we do moving forward to make sure that women are safe and educated around human and sex trafficking. I attend an AME church. We have had several people who have been victimized by predators and or the police department in sexual trafficking incidents, where we have partnered with Children's Mercy Hospital to give seminars to educate the public on how to keep themselves safe from human and sex trafficking. At one point, Children's Mercy put out a press release telling people not to call the police when they found themselves in trouble with sexual assault, and they had to pull that press release because of the backlash they got, but they went forward with the training as a way to educate people. So yeah, human and sex trafficking is something huge in our city. We know rumors of stories that are closely connected to people, but that is one of those things that you really have to have the proof before you can do anything or set yourself in danger, so to speak, like that. But yeah, it's something strong here.
Wow. I was staggered with the hospital release. Were you going to add anything, Ms. Richardson?
No, the Missouri side, that is where Khadijah knows the best. So I let her, she knows way more than I do. She's expert on that end.
Yes, ma'am.
I live in Kansas City, Missouri.
I see. Okay. I did not know about the ongoing, not that I should be that stunned about it, but the ongoing missing black females, or I don't know if they're children or what the case. Where should we check, I guess, for updates about current information about missing and children that are, or females in this area? Where should we check for updates?
So the one thing I like to tell people about human and sex trafficking is educate yourself about the process. When you are a black child, they typically do not call what happens to you a kidnapping. Even if you're lured away by some predator, they do not refer to it as that. They refer to black children as runaways, or you just left the house for the weekend. So they never put Amber Alerts out on missing children in the black community because of the way they have classified black children. So it makes them easier for them to fall through the thread or the system. And so the language barrier, I tell people all the time to educate themselves about how they present their missing loved one to the authorities, because they're not going to take that story and present it well if you don't present it well. So that's the number one thing I could tell people is that. The second thing I could tell them is that you have a loved one that's gone missing, especially if they have some mental incapacity or some disability, get in touch with the folks that have that disability that can help you advocate on behalf of the person. In particular, I know a young man who went missing for several days. And I think he had some kind of mental illness, but he also had epilepsy. And I informed the family members to get in touch with the epilepsy community. And the epilepsy community went out on this individual's behalf and were able to find the individual alive. And so I think just finding the commonality with other people that can help you advocate is really the strongest way to find your loved one if they're missing.
Great information, Ms. Hardaway. Great information. Black people are never victim. Even that's a big part of the Golubski case. That's something that I try to pinpoint all the time, that a lot of these rapes, these were children. And I emphasize that all the time, like, yes, raping anyone is bad, but this is raping children. I mean, man, never victims, never seen as victims. That is so important. You go out and articulate and structuring your words correctly so that black runaway, maybe we'll get around to it if you don't have anything else to do. If there's nothing bad on TV, we'll be concerned about the black runaway. Man, I have learned so much. For listeners, make sure you go to the website Justice For Wyandotte.org. Wyandotte is WYANDOTTE. Justice For Wyandotte.org. You can hit the Give tab. Financial contributions, super appreciated, and time and energy to make sure that we do not forget about this case and all of these black victims in the Metro Kansas area. Is there anything that you all want to make sure folks know about before we let you enjoy the rest of your Sunday evening, Ms. Hardaway, Ms. Richardson?
Nikki, is there anything you want?
I just appreciate people caring about this story. Sometimes it can oftentimes feel like nobody is listening to us or nobody is paying attention to us. So we're just grateful for that support. We are going to continue the fight of making sure that Wyandotte County, Kansas City, Kansas, the people who've been impacted by this tragedy have a pathway for healing forward. So any assistance in helping us do that will always be greatly appreciated, but just keeping the story in people's ears definitely helps. So thank you so much.
What I do want to say is that you can follow us on Facebook. We keep it up to date with what our next events are, what the media is reported on, what we're reporting on, and we also facilitate quite a few different trainings. Nikki has a training, and I do a training in particular with conflict resolution, just helping prepare the community to have meetings with elected officials, community partners, and just being able to solve the issues that they're going through within the community without resorting to violence. So it's layered. And then Nikki can tell you about the training she personally gives, and we're also working on a couple of other trainings, one being an empowerment trainer. So Nikki, go ahead if you...
Yeah, so we are partnering with the Department of Justice to have mediations with community organizations to kind of have more of a collaborative conversation around the systematic gaps that allows Golubski to impact these women. So we're going to be really having strong conversations around medical care, addiction, trafficking, criminal justice, and housing as it pertains to Black women in the Kansas City, Kansas area. And we are going to be giving trainings to community organizations on how to have those conversations in a way that's productive so we can build some solutions to make sure that this doesn't happen again in the future.
The address again, Justice For Wyandotte.org. Joining us live this evening from Wyandotte County, Khadijah Hardaway, Nikki Richardson, the co-founders of Justice for Wyandotte. I have learned so much about the region. We will definitely be in touch. I'm going to go follow on Facebook so I can keep track with the updates and all that of what you all are doing in the region. But we will definitely be keeping an eye out for what you all are doing in the future, and hopefully we'll be able to speak with you again and get some updates on what has been happening down at Timothy Hazlitt Jr. We will definitely be paying attention. So our eyes will be, I guess, go Chiefs, and then we'll be paying attention for Timothy Hazlitt Jr.
Yeah.
as well. Right on.
That's right. 3-peat on the way.
See. Much obliged again for your time and energy, and we know what they'll be doing this time next Sunday. Whoopee for Pat Mahomes. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday evening, ladies.
You too.
Thank you for having us.
For sure. Context of white supremacy. Again, joining us live, Khadijah Hardaway, Nikki Richardson, the co-founders of Justice for Wyandotte. The address is justiceforwyandotte.org. Much obliged for all the folks tuned in. Hope it was worthy of your Sunday evening. We'll take a quick commercial break. Let folks know when we'll be here for the programs this coming week. Black History Month, right, just started yesterday, and so-called Groundhog Day. I don't even know if, they saw the shadow or anything. I do not participate in all those pagan rituals, Christmas, Groundhog Day, really Black History Month either. But, yeah, we'll have to see if the rodent saw himself today and all that nonsense. Quick commercial break. We'll be right back. Context of white supremacy.
And from the late 1960s, after the death of Martin Luther King and the riots and the upheavals and all like this, and black people with their fists in the air and all like that, and trying to stumble and fumble and find their way and get focus, the white supremacists made a blueprint and put it into action. And that is, I'm confused. They don't even know what they started out to do. And by the late 1970s, they had just about completed it. And we've been on that ever since. And you mentioned something very important. They are more comfortable than ever. But see, it's like making gorillas comfortable in a cage, or monkeys, or pandas. You still got them in a cage, but they're comfortable. See, so give him some bling bling. It's like giving an animal a brand new car and training the animal to ride up and down the street in it. And then you stand back and point at the animal. Like one white man said in the late 1950s. He said he doesn't care what kind of car a Negro has. He said he's still a nigger. And when he rides by in a shiny car, to him, it's just a monkey in a car. White people built a car, put a monkey in it, trained the monkey to drive the car, so now you're looking at a monkey in a car. See, but black people don't see themselves that way. But this is how the white supremacists see us, and they are the ones who run our business. And we have to know that when they look at us, that's what they see. That's what they see. That's what they see. And at a subliminal level, what they see begins to spill over into our brains so that we, at a subliminal level, see each other that way. And indirectly see ourselves that way.
Context of white supremacy. Anyhoodles, it did snow in Seattle today, but this is what I love about Seattle. So I woke up, I opened the curtains. There was snow all over the ground. I was stunned. I had no idea it was going to snow. I had been looking at the weather reports. It didn't look like it was going to be cold enough for there to be snow. Like, what is going on? So I look in disbelief. I take a photograph. And then I start to process, like, this means absolutely nothing. I have groceries already stacked up, and groceries aplenty. Like, I could cook for days, and exotic things like pad thai with vegan scrambled egg, like exotic thing. All of my nutty smoothies that I enjoy, like, I'm pretty good. I don't have as much fresh produce as I would like, but there is a grocery store across the street that did not close for the snow. And beyond all of that, this is 2:06. So I took a nap. Briefly, I saw the snow, went back to work, looked at all of this like, this is wacky. Went back to work, Roger Golubski, raping white man, took my nap. I woke up and rolled over. It was about 3:30 p.m. Pacific time. If you went outside, if you had not been outside, if you didn't know anything about the snow, hadn't seen it, if you, like, let's say you had been asleep the whole time, you've been napping the whole day, and you woke up at 3:30 and walked outside, it would be kind of challenging to convince you that it did actually snow and that the ground was white for a time earlier today. In fact, it doesn't even look like it rained today. That is Seattle 206. And generally, that's about the way it goes with the snow. Like, boy, if it snows, you had better run out there quick and make a snowman or anything else, because it will be gone promptly. Now, normally promptly is like within 24 hours, not 24 minutes, but either way, it is not going to be a major inconvenience or anything of the sort. Like, we will be fine. Doesn't even look like it rained. Anyway, we will be here at minimum for the book club. Already mentioned, Dr. Maya Angelou, victim of rape. I might even have to go back and get that archive. I played, if I can get personal for one moment. So this is the second time that we read Dr. Maya Angelou in the Catherine Massey book club. First time around, 2014. It was 1 year, or it was the same year Daniel Holtzclaw. It was the same year Daniel Holtzclaw was arrested. The trial was the following year, 2015, but he was arrested the summer of 2014, just a few weeks after Dr. Angelou passed away. We had the book club. We had, I think it was the fourth, about midway through the book, I chose an interview that Dr. Angelou did with Charlie Rose, white man who has been accused of sexual misconduct himself. She does this interview with Charlie Rose, and she's talking about, I think she did a number of interviews with him, but she does this interview, and she's talking about the history of racism in the U.S. And Dr. Angelou, she says that the history of black people in this area, and she's talking about black females specifically, is we've been on the plantation, still are, and have to nurse white babies, wet nurse them and all that, and change their diapers and rear them, and you do all this, and then they turn around and rape you once they get big enough. That's our whole history here. Yep. Now, I am paraphrasing, but I mean, I'm just a scooch of paraphrasing, because I mean, that's almost exactly what she said. It's about a 7-minute conversation, so there's context, and you can hear the question that, prompted her giving this response, but I thought it was totally accurate. Somehow, and even for full context, so for the book club, I played the full unedited 7-minute interview where all of this was said in the book club. After the book club, once Daniel Holtzclaw got arrested, I took just that sound clip where she said that. That's our whole history. Like rearing race soldiers, and then they turn around and rape you or your son or your daughter or both. Yep, accurate. I played that on the compensatory call-in as a preface, the way I normally do, for Daniel Holtzclaw, and a listener got upset and took the conclusion somehow that I was suggesting that black females exclusively are culpable in the system of white supremacy and are deserved of some sort of mistreatment. What? And I'm stunned as though you've not heard this clip before. The person who made this allegation, you listen to the book club. I just played this whole segment, and that is an anathema to anything, any viewpoint I've ever taken on the cows. We are all victims. There's no helping white people rape black males, black children. How would that be? Oh, you got what you deserve for it. Come on. Doesn't even make sense. Come on. Anyway, I will stand by our work, though. Man, for some cases that have not gotten very much attention at all, Daniel Holtzclaw, that would be one. We have done our diligence. We covered that case from the time he was arrested all the way through the trial. It is in the archives, OKC Artists for Justice, 2014, 2015. As I said, we brought that up with Dr. Kenneth O'Reilly, and how James Chaney and those two white boys, 1964, how was that case broken open? Don't make me snitch on you, sexually sewering these black children down here in Mississippi. That's how they broke that case open, according to what Dr. Kenneth O'Reilly wrote in Racial Matters. And even, I would submit, Roger Golubski raping all these black children. They got an article where he picked a black 12-year-old, a 12-year-old. That is exactly white culture. That's Thomas Jefferson, all of it. They go and rape these children, Catholic Church, that's all of it. They go and rape these children, and then they say, oh, well, it was a romance, or, he was raping black women. And no, man. This is child. Call it what it is every time. Every time. When it's Thomas Jefferson and on the plantation, that's child rape. Roger Golubski, a lot of this, not all, but a lot of this is child rape. Call that what it is, man. Now, if we want to minimize and all the rest of it, hey, why are we doing all this for a child? Why is a child rapist allowed to hang out at home? Same thing with Donald Trump pardoning all these white child rapists. I said that. How many of these January 6 folks got some kind of child rape charges? Why should they get all this leniency? Anyway, white culture. Speaking of which, I have so much appreciation. I'm so glad we did the program because I learned so much. Even just the tidbit, and I mean, I learned so much. Who was Alvin Sykes? I'd never even heard his name before. But I learned so much, even that tidbit, in terms of the suspicion about whether or not Roger Golubski is actually deceased. That could be the type of thing that one could easily, oh, you're just, into some conspiracy theory and fake news. And what do you mean, he's not dead? They told you he's dead. It was in the newspaper, and they got the autopsy. Just some of the, even when she said, being at the courthouse, and they said, he's on the run. Really? He's on the run. Are there alarms? I mean, are you all, do you have what do they call it, an all points bulletin? You got the drag net set on? Let me get around to it. Wow. I could see why one might have questions. They said it looked like it was trash bags that were going out. Like, what? To what? Yes, I can see why one might have questions with all this lying and deception. Did he actually commit suicide? Is he in Cancun someplace? Master deceivers. Last two things I'll get in. Miss Richardson's grandmother is a total superhero. That is exactly, and I mean precisely, what is recommended. We had Steve Silverman as a guest on the program. He's done, he has the website flexyourrights.org, and they have a number of videos that are specifically about what to do if you encounter race soldiers during a police stop. They have vignettes for what to do if you're walking, what to do if you're in a vehicle, what to do if you're in your residence. They say specifically, you're in your residence. Oh, raping race soldier Roger Golubski comes. Well, you're in there, coon. Open the door. Open the door up right now. if they don't have a warrant, that's what you say. If you didn't call them, you didn't make a report, you need to talk to an enforcement official about something suspicious, a crime, whatever. If they don't, hey, we have a warrant. They generally announce. They are loud. Now, sometimes they lie and do all their nefarious, but by law, they are supposed to make it clear and loud. We have a warrant to enter the premises. Your arrest, search, whatever. We have a warrant. If they don't have that warrant, that's what you say. Nothing. We're not even talking about open the door. Please. At most, I look through the peephole, and that's it. And that's what Grandma did. A plus, a double plus, a triple plus. Any situation. The case in Harvard, in fact, Dr. Skip Lewis Gates, once he got in the house, you don't have to answer the door. You don't have a warrant. Deuces. And in fact, I remember with that case, for them to arrest him because they didn't have a warrant, they asked him to step outside. He did, and then they placed the cuffs on him. If he had stayed in his house, wouldn't have been arrested because they didn't have a warrant. We did talk about that a tad, technicalities of law. That is an enormous one. Oh, stay in the house with the door closed. Do exactly what her grandmother did. Especially 4 o'clock in the morning. Are you serious? I wouldn't care if it's 4 in the afternoon either, but are you serious? I didn't call. You're not going to Golubski me? No way. Nothing. I don't even have nothing to say. Anyway, I do want to point out, and not as a criticism or anything else, it's just an observation statement of fact. And I said this years ago when I switched, and I said, hey, white guest only policy, I'm breaking the rule, and I'll decide, when to break the rule to get information on Golubski. I thought that was important to break the rule. Okay, I said we have non-white people, as opposed to me giving them my definition of racism and asking them if they think it's valid, whatever. I'll see if they have a definition. Now you can see over the years, the limited times when we have non-white people, do they have a definition for racism? Do they have a definition for racism that makes sense? Does it seem like they have a written down definition of racism that they've thought about or they've taken from someone else, all of which, fine, no problem there. But does that seem that they have a working framework for grasping, oh, okay, this is what racism is, and this is what produces the Roger Golubskis, Daniel Holtzclaw, this sort of situation happening over and over and over again? I would humbly submit evidence non-white people consistently not even having a definition for racism, that right there, you cannot convince me. These people are experts. We are experts on racism when generally we don't even have a definition for this concept. That's the type of thing that I'm saying, to see how consistent that is with non-white people. We don't even have a definition for this concept that we are supposed to be the experts. We are supposed to know more than anybody else about what racism is and how it works. I would also humbly add, because the system of white supremacy racism still exists until we solve this problem. I think to Groundhog Day, isn't that the pagan ritual for today? One of the movies or rituals associated with this is some sort of repetition. I think that, I don't know which way it is. If the groundhog, if he sees a shadow or doesn't, either we have a repetition of more winter, and the other way, spring comes early or whatever it is. The repetition for us will be, we're going to solve the system of white supremacy racism, or there will be more Roger Golubskis, Regina Golubskis, Daniel Holtzclaws, Dana Holtzclaws. This is a part of the system of white supremacy racism. And this, I mean, white person, badge, gun, I can go rape niggers. Remember Justin Volpe? Took the plunger, put it in the rectum of Abner Louima. Remember that? And then he paraded it around the police station like a trophy. Remember that? That's white culture. This is Negro History Month. Justin Volpe, they should put that plunger up for Negro History. That's what I mean. Like, it's nothing you could do but tackiness for Black History Month. But put that plunger out. Let's make sure we don't forget that for Black History, because that is white culture, and that's the system of white supremacy racism. So until we solve this problem, this will continue. I would say the evidence, look what happened here. I repeat what I said before. It looks like the only people who are going to trial for all of this are going to be 3 privileged black dudes. Ouch. Folks who dialed in, did y'all have any commentary to? Oh, wait a minute, I got to get one more. I have to get one more, because I was not trying to get plugged for the cows when I asked, when did you hear about even that right there? Because I didn't ask where, right? I asked when. I was looking for a specific period in time. Like, when did you hear about this case? Because it had been talked about for years. Did you hear about this in 2020, 2022? That was what I was looking for, implied by the question, when, not where or what platform. But that notwithstanding, oh my goodness. This right here is what I'm talking about. All of the people that are classified as black who say, I just love me some black people, and specifically, I love me some black people who are born in the U.S. I don't like all these old pretend black people, and I don't care about nothing, no Patrice Lumumba and what's happening to the Congolese people in the mines and those South Africans and later for Nelson Mandela. I love me some black people who are born right here in the good old U.S. of A. Well then, hey, you all should be leading the charge. Make sure we know about Roger Golubski. Yes, I think Kansas is in the U.S., right? That's the type of thing that I'm talking about, as opposed to sitting around and talking about television, what we watched on Netflix. I guess eventually they'll have something about Golubski on Netflix, but I mean, we could catch it first before it gets to the big screen, as opposed to talking about TV and movies, as opposed to complaining and being in conflict with other black people. There are important things that we could be talking about. I wasn't looking for the plug for the cows, but I didn't hear any of the folks say, them folks that be in love with the African Americans and just love them some black people, they are the ones who've been talking about this case every day and can't stop talking about it. I didn't hear that at all. That's one more to make sure that I get in. Facts. It's a lot more in terms of how we use our time and energy as opposed to watching TV and complaining about black people. Man, you could go, what can I do? Because they said if you don't have no coins, you can give some of your time and energy to Justice for Wyandotte. How about that? If you really care about black people and you don't want to pretend black people that are born right here, there you go. Folks who dialed in, you have commentary to share before we wrap things up.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Am I able to be heard?
Yes, ma'am.
So it would have been 2022 when I first heard about Roger Golubski. Sorry if I didn't answer that question correctly. I did notice the talk about economics. That's pretty common. And also partnering with the Department of Justice around, I can't remember what she said, something around gaps, reference housing black females in the Kansas City area. Oh, I don't know. I'm not sure if that Department of Justice assistance will continue under this new administration. And that's all I have.
I was thinking when she said that, much obliged, Lauren, about the partnership with the Department of Justice. What does that look like with the new administration? Like, do they come in and think, this kind of has a DEI-ish tint to it. I don't know. Like, woo-wee. They, you have to see what that looks like. Man, like, I don't know. They might, because they generally, you have to see what that looks like with the new administration. Anyway, that also is very common, not said as a critique. I didn't take what Lauren said as a critique at all, but that is very common. Capitalism, economics, system of white supremacy. I even looked at the numbers. Like, if I got it correctly, if the number of victims, official, put air quotes for sure, if the number of victims that Roger Golubski is officially charged with is 122 in the RICO case, and then 8 for the sexual abuse, 4 of them are white, and everybody else is non-white, and most of them are black. That's not even 4%. That's not even 3% of the victims. I mean, whew, man. Like, man, I would even be curious. Who are these 4 white people? Were any of them in a tragic arrangement with a non-white person? Do they live in a predominantly black area? Like, like, who are these 4 white sacrifice for sure? But I would be like, if I ever went to Kansas City, Kansas, I would be curious, who are these 4 white people? And then let's get to the other victims. But Justice For Wyandotte.org, tremendous work, no criticism, but that is very common, where I've heard lots of non-white people who have said it is economics, capitalism. Fuller says the master capitalists, racist man, racist woman, racist child. Any of the other folks have commentary that they wanted to share? Everybody satisfied? We didn't miss anybody? Grand. Hope folks learned some information and are motivated to stay informed or just keep an eye out from time to time in terms of what is happening in the Kansas City area. It's certainly the trial of Timothy Hazlitt. I will do my part to keep us abreast of when we get close to that and all that good stuff, and then other details with regards to the Golubski case specifically. But be abreast. That's another one I would share. Certainly if you live close to the Kansas, Missouri region, I would share. And then just period. If you have children, yourself, you talk to other individuals about the system of white supremacy, racism, this would be a case I share because it went on for so long and it impacted so many people. They still have people who are in greater confinement right now. Where Roger Golubski charged with raping the mom and then falsely putting the children in prison, and to see that pattern over and over. That was Lamont McIntyre's case as well. To just see that over and over and over for all of these years, that is the sort of thing I would talk to. And that reason to talk to your children, and you don't have to go old-timey. And when I mean old-timey, you don't have to go and, yeah, we got to talk about Emmett Till and Eyes on the Prize and all that. That's important to discuss, but I mean, this is right now, current day happenings in terms of what to do, what not to do, why you need to have a code in terms of do not open the door if enforcement officers come and you haven't called them. It could be Roger Golubski. Have a code about what to do, what not to do, what to say, what not to say, to do the best that you can to keep yourself safe. We are in a system of white supremacy racism, and for males and females. Justin Volpe, that's why I said all of that. Roger Golubski, Daniel Holtzclaw, Justin Volpe. Long history, well documented, of white people, white enforcement officers sexually terrorizing black people, and most of the time getting away with it with impunity. That's the goon squad. How could I forget that, man? That's the goon squad. I'm going to put chocolate sauce on some black males and put them in the shower together and sodomize them. Got a dildo ready. That's the goon squad. That's not Kansas, but that's right down the road. That's all of that. This is white culture. Put that out on display. And okay, and we don't have offspring. If you're not going to be a tempted parent enough to talk to your offspring, because these folks were attacking children, many of them. So if you're not going to be a tempted parent enough to talk honestly with your offspring about these problems in a way to keep them safe as possible under the dangerous situation that we exist in, don't have offspring. You just going to send them out there to Roger Golubski and not tell them nothing? Try and give them any advice or information to try and keep themselves safe? Hope for the best. Come on. We can do better.
Can I ask something? I'm sorry, I just was away from the phone.
Victim in New Jersey?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Gus, I just wanted to say, also to give a plug to the Cavs. I've yet to hear anybody make that connection between the Goon Squad and the guy who racially targeted black male with a pickup truck. So I've yet to even hear anybody make that connection outside of the Cavs as well.
Pattern recognition. Probably mostly because we spend our time in conflict frequently, not all, but I mean, hey, that is a lot of us, as opposed to paying attention to things that are just happening right now. That's right now. That's what I said. That's not old timey. That's stuff you could be getting updates on your iPhone and Apple Watch, because that's happening right now. It's been happening the last couple of years. We could be talking about that. No, we want to be not all of us, but large numbers of us. White people are most to blame, but that doesn't make it any better, nor does that change how we use our time and energy. Paying attention to things that are happening right. I say that all the time. Pay attention to the news. Be paying attention to things that happen. I know it's got to be some non-white people in the Kansas region. There you go. That's one thing you can be paying attention to and catching up on reports. It's got to be some in the Mississippi region. Goon Squad. You should be an expert. Read everything on that. New York area, and you don't know about Justin Volpe. Well, there you go. Catch up on that and get all of that information. But just pattern recognition and seeing the same thing over and over again. Maybe that's a part of the appeal of the badge. I get my nigger knocker. There's a whole lot of things I can do with that nigger knocker, yes. Phallic symbol, yes. Do some raping. I love it. They give me that taser and bow, get them unconscious, and woof, I can go to town. Where's my plunger? What does it mean to be white? I'd also say, just from the evidence, it is hard to make connections if you are not aware. Now, the people that are most to blame, my BFF, Amy Goodman, the New York Times, they didn't cover this case at all. I think Lauren, she said that she heard NPR, they had a few segments in Kansas City on Kansas Public Radio. It's probably where they pilfered. Kansas Public Radio, they have a whole segment podcast on Roger Golubski specifically, where you can hear from some of the victims. They also have the 7th Street podcast, where they, same thing, where you get to hear directly from some of the victims. These are local Kansas City podcasts done by local Kansas City residents, so you can hear directly. But beyond that, I mean, white people did not cover this case at all. They sat there and talked about all kinds of other, DEI and all these other, all these other subject matter. But this case, which has gone on for years, has got so little attention. But that said, hey, I found it. I don't have no monstrous staff and monstrous budget. and I found it and have kept up with it. So other folks, they could do the same. You got an iPhone and all the rest of it. You got your Apple Watch. You could do the same thing and keep up with this case and what have you to know what's happening to black people. And not one or two black people, like a whole town of black people terrorized with impunity, and now they're not even going to have that. It looks like the only people going to trial for any of this will be 3 privileged black males. Ouch. That's all I can say. Like, how does that happen? Like, woo, all of this, nothing with Roger Golubski. We don't even know if he, maybe, like I said, if he's out in Cancun chilling on the beach or whatever, and 3 privileged black males will be left, what did they say, holding the bag. Ouch. Anyway, the TB was fascinating as well. I said I learned so much. I had not even heard of that. Like, oh my God, like that is serious, right? Like, man, I know they had the plane crashes and everything, and that's not as dramatic as, a plane in the water and you got to go and fish out the bodies. But dang, that's another one. If I had residents in the Kansas area, like, whoa, did you know about, man, are you taking precautions? And yes, get your mask and no closed spaces, and wow, I wouldn't want to be in no big crowds. And I'm like, wow, that is, system of white supremacy is so unhealthy and dangerous for so many reasons. But massive TB issue, tuberculosis, in Kansas City, Kansas, probably leaking to Kansas City, Missouri, because that's right there too. But at least for right now, this is in Kansas City, Kansas. So if you know people in the region, let them know and advise them to take it seriously. Man, that would be Fuller again. System of white supremacy. I got your health. If I got total control over you, I got your health. We already know you're going to be at risk. That's why I said I have to look at that, because I already know who is going to be at greater risk in the Kansas City area. It'll be Golubski's victims and 4 white people. Let's see. Much obliged for folks dialing in. Hopefully constructive information for a Sunday evening. I wanted to do this for the Super Bowl, man. Oh, well. I guess folks I'll see if we'll wrestle up something else for next Sunday. But, man, if I had my white genie and could have done it all, we would have done this next week, concurrent with the Super Bowl. But oh well. Any hoodles. Book Club, Thursday, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. Dr. Maya Angelou, The Heart of a Woman, Victim of Rape as well. Terry Gross even thought she was going to be raped at the UN too, but talked about that earlier. You can check social media and such if we have programs earlier than this Thursday. Visit Justice For Wyandotte.org. Contribute if you have a few coins and if you have time and energy. I've never even heard that before from someone where yes, you can invest and keep us afloat, but you also hear ways that you can invest your time and energy. Hey, if you got a few moments, everybody can pause the YouTube for 5 minutes, yes. Pause the Netflix for 5 minutes, yes. And we can help out some victims of racism. I love it. Love it. Justice For Wyandotte.org. Glad we could share for the folks who found out about the Golubski case from the cows on our assignment right on. Hopefully we can continue to share. But again, we were late. This case they had been talking about, she said it had been rumored for years, and then it had been talked about, at least like when I say publicly in the newspapers and such, it had been talked about since at least like 2017, if not before. Almost a decade, like a full decade of this Golubski mentioned by name and all that allegations. Oh my God, he's raping all these black people and blah, 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 and putting all these black people in jail and blah, 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 and Lamont McIntyre. Like almost a full decade. a full decade. So we were way late. Better late than never. Sobriety, and man, for this program, gee whiz, you want your brain computer. That would be another way I would talk to offspring. Man, imagine being out at night or even at home. Imagine being her grandmother and it's 4 o'clock in the morning. Now imagine she had just polished off a bottle of Thunderbird malt liquor. She's at home. That could have been legal, but oh man, if I have been drinking and an enforcement officer comes to my door, maybe I'm thinking correctly, and I know, I don't even have to answer the door. I don't have to say a word. Maybe I don't. People have been known when they are intoxicated, people have been known not to make the best decisions. You're out in a vehicle, same thing. I'm under the influence. Maybe I make the correct decisions to keep myself safe in that vehicle. Maybe we get into 100-mile-per-hour high-speed chase. Because I've lost my license, wink, wink. You got Roger Golubski might be pulling you over. Daniel Holtzclaw might be pulling you over. You want to be super-duper sober in the system of white supremacy so that you can make spectacular decisions. Keep yourself safe. It is so dangerous. I keep saying that for so many reasons. It is so dangerous. You want to be sober so that you can do the best you can to keep yourself safe. You, anybody else that you are responsible for if you have offspring. Creator, we ask that you help us remain patient with other black people, victims of white supremacy. We ask that you help us remain patient with ourselves. Remind us to demonstrate the highest levels of black self-respect at all times, in all places, each and every time we are in contact with another black person. It has been time. Replace white supremacy with justice immediately. No name calling black people. No gossiping. They did say that was gossip. That was in the news reports. They said they were rumors that Golubski had been raping. No gossiping. No throwaway offspring. Justice for Wyandotte.org. Cal signing out. Thanks all for tuning in.
Nigga, you so brainwashed. I'm a victim, brother. No problem. You're a victim. I'm a victim of 400 years of conditioning. Shut up. The man has programmed my conditioning. Mm-hmm. Even my conditioning has been conditioned.